Step away from the drill, sir. You are in violation of Neighborhood Code 17.6b. I blinked twice, trying to process what I was hearing. Two men in matching polos, knockoff aviators, and dollar store utility belts were aiming plastic handcuffs at me while I stood on my driveway with a cordless drill in hand and a bucket of screws at my feet. My garage door was halfway open, revealing a perfectly ordinary home improvement project. I was swapping out some weather stripping and adjusting the hinges on the side door. Nothing wild. But apparently I had triggered a full-blown emergency protocol. According to the gentleman in front of me, self-proclaimed officers of an HOA that no longer existed. One of them had a laminated badge clipped to his belt that read, Neighborhood Enforcement Unit, in Comic Sans. The other held what looked like a clipboard with printed citations. I glanced at it. The top line read, Garage Infraction, Level Yellow. I bit my tongue, then exhaled sharply through my nose. This wasn't real. Couldn't be. You're going to need to come with us, said the taller one. He had a ponytail and a Bluetooth headset in one ear, like a rent-a-cop from a mall security fantasy. We have received 3 complaints about unauthorized modifications on a decorative-facing structure, which violates Section 17.6b of our community code. He tapped the clipboard like it meant something. I stared at them, then looked toward my neighbor's house, where an elderly woman peeked through her blinds, visibly amused. You boys done yet? I finally said, setting the drill down gently and wiping my hands on my jeans. Because I've got real work to do. That's when they escalated. The one with the ponytail stepped forward and made a grab for my wrist. I didn't move. I just stared at his hand like it was a bug crawling toward a landmine. My body stayed calm. But mentally, something shifted. The years of training, the hours of conditioning, the muscle memory of a life I tried to leave behind, they all surged to the surface in a single breath. He stopped an inch away from touching me. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the cold way I stared through him. Or maybe, just maybe, it was the glint of the faded tattoo on my forearm now visible as I rolled up my sleeve, a distinct patch bearing the crossed arrows of the U.S. Army Special Forces. They didn't recognize it. Of course they didn't. I turned and walked back into my garage without a word. Behind me, I could hear them shouting about fleeing a citation scene and civilian obstruction. One of them yelled for backup. Their backup turned out to be a neighborhood teenager wearing a reflective vest on a Segway, holding a walkie-talkie with no batteries. I stepped over a toolbox and pressed a button on a mounted shelf. My garage door lowered halfway again. Not closed, just low enough to block the view from the street. Inside, I made one phone call. Package confirmed. 2 idiots in uniform. Going live. A calm voice on the other end responded. Copy that. 5 minutes later, I emerged from the garage again, this time with calm authority radiating off me. No anger. No adrenaline. Just quiet disappointment. Like a teacher dealing with children who had tried cheating with a crayon. The officers were still there, now joined by their Segway-mounted backup who looked like he regretted every decision he'd ever made. I stood in front of them and crossed my arms. You said you're here under HOA code? That's right, said the shorter one. We're authorized by the community board. You're interfering with uniformed enforcement. I reached into my back pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a scanned notice from the county dated 3 years ago, confirmation that the HOA had been dissolved due to financial mismanagement and legal disputes. I handed it to them like a courtroom exhibit. This neighborhood hasn't had an HOA since 2022. They looked at the paper, then at each other, then back at me. Ponytail tried to recover. Well, we're under the community council's authority. A volunteer task force. That council was disbanded last year. You're impersonating an authority figure. On private property. With a fake badge. He opened his mouth to protest again, but I took a step forward. You're trying to detain a homeowner. You walked onto my driveway, attempted to put hands on me, issued false citations, and threatened arrest. That's not a code violation, my friend. That's a crime. I let that sink in for a beat before I delivered the final blow. And you picked the one guy on this block whose garage isn't full of lawn tools and paint cans. The garage door behind me rose fully, revealing a parked military jeep, a secured rack with rucksacks and a duffel marked medical, a shelf lined with gear from tours I don't talk about, and, folded neatly on a bench, a full green beret dress uniform. Their mouths dropped. Not just at the gear, but at the quiet precision of how it was all arranged. Nothing chaotic. Nothing decorative. Everything placed with intent. It wasn't a show. It was a statement. I pointed to the duffel bag. You know what that is? That's the same pack I carried through the Hindu Kush when your biggest concern was HOA newsletter fonts. The ponytail guy stammered. Your military? I didn't answer. I just walked to the edge of the driveway, then pointed to the pavement. See that crack right there? I said. That's the border between your little HOA fantasy world and my jurisdiction. Everything beyond that crack belongs to me. The silence was beautiful. Even the teenager on the Segway stopped rolling and whispered, "Oh man." I turned and walked back inside, leaving the door open just enough so the whole block could hear the sound of me unlocking a small case. I wasn't grabbing a weapon. I was pulling out documentation. Records. Footage. Backup. You don't just walk into a Green Beret's yard pretending to be the law. You don't try to arrest a man trained to dismantle insurgent cells in jungles and deserts across the world. But the beauty of it was, I didn't need to touch them. I didn't need to yell. I didn't even need to threaten. They'd already done all the damage themselves. Because everything they said, every fake command they gave, every citation they read out loud, had already been recorded. And the real sheriff was on his way. The sirens weren't blaring. That's what made it more unsettling. No dramatic engine rev, no screeching tires, just the quiet crunch of gravel as a black SUV pulled up beside the curb. The two wannabe HOA enforcers froze mid-sentence, their citations fluttering slightly in the afternoon breeze. The teenager on the Segway tried to roll away, but the SUV door opened before he made it to the sidewalk. A man in dark slacks, pressed shirt, and sunglasses stepped out, carrying a matte black briefcase like he was walking into a board meeting. He didn't say a word to the fake cops. He walked straight past them and handed me the briefcase. I nodded, thanked him, and he returned to the SUV without looking back. Then they drove off. No license plate. No markings. Just another shadow passing through town. I turned back to the stunned trio standing on my driveway, now visibly sweating despite the mild weather. I set the briefcase on the hood of my old Jeep, snapped the latches, and opened it. The taller one with the ponytail actually took a step back like I was about to pull out some top-secret weapon. What came out was arguably worse. Paperwork. Photos. Signed affidavits. Internal memos. And a stapled stack labeled Operation False Flag, Civilian Impersonators, Tier 3 Pattern Repeaters. Their faces drained of color when they saw their names printed at the top. You've done this before, I said plainly, spreading the documents out like cards on a poker table. Different towns. Different uniforms. Same script. You print up old HOA bylaws from decommissioned communities and pretend you're still enforcing them. You fine retirees. You threaten single moms with garage code violations so they'll pay cash to avoid fake hearings. I tapped the printout. 3 counties, 2 pending lawsuits, and 1 very interesting audio recording where you bragged about being the neighborhood law. They both started talking at once, overlapping nonsense about misunderstandings, community service, and being misinformed volunteers. I held up one hand. It was enough to silence a room when I was in uniform, and apparently, that hadn't changed. I pointed to the security camera on the corner of the garage. Then another above the porch. Then the doorbell cam. Every second of your interaction with me has been recorded. Audio. Video. Time-stamped. The shorter one stuttered. We didn't mean to impersonate officers. We were just what? I cut him off. Trying to scare people into compliance? Handing out fake tickets? You almost grabbed me. On my land? That's assault. That's impersonation of law enforcement. And that little clipboard of yours? Fraud. For a second, they both went completely still, as if their brains were running simulations for the best escape route. Unfortunately for them, there wasn't one. Not physically. Not legally. They'd already walked too far into this mess. And I hadn't even told them the worst part yet. I picked up a remote from inside the toolbox beside me and hit a button. The side wall of the garage opened like a cabinet door, revealing a mounted panel of screens, small but efficient. Each one showed a different angle of the driveway, porch, and street. But it wasn't just the current footage. It was the past 4 days, condensed into thumbnails. Every time they had passed by. Every bogus inspection they'd performed. Every time they'd peeked through windows or taken photos of people's yards. You've been under observation for a week, I said. This wasn't just about me. I moved here after my neighbor told me what happened to her. You gave her a $150 fine for unauthorized head shaping. She's 82. Legally blind. You threatened to file a lien. The shorter one actually looked like he might cry. The taller one started backing away toward the sidewalk, but before he could reach the edge, another vehicle pulled up. This one had a sheriff's star on the door and a dust-coated grill that said it didn't mind dirt roads or wild days. Out stepped a man in his 50s with a jaw like granite and eyes that had seen too many liars. He wore a plain brown uniform, no flash, no shine. But when he saw me, he smiled. Well, I'll be damned. Thought you were done with fieldwork. He offered his hand. I shook it. Was until these two knuckleheads gave me a reason. The sheriff turned to the fake enforcers, then to their Segway sidekick who was now trying to casually hide behind a recycling bin. Names? He said flatly. Now. They hesitated, but then the taller one cracked. Full names. No aliases. No defense. Just panic surrender. The sheriff looked back at me. You pressing charges? I've got footage. Witness statements. Pattern behavior across state lines. He nodded once. Good enough for me. As his deputies began handcuffing the pair, not with toy cuffs, but with cold steel, the sidewalk started to fill with onlookers. Phones came out. The same community that had been harassed for months was now watching justice roll in like a quiet storm. One man even started clapping. A woman across the street shouted, You got them, Mark! I smiled faintly. That wasn't my name, but I wasn't about to correct her. Let the myth grow. The Segway kid tried to disappear into the crowd, but the sheriff waved a deputy in his direction. Get his parents on the line. We'll talk about accessory charges. I looked down at the briefcase still open on my Jeep. One corner of a folder stuck out, an old military seal barely visible under the flap. I closed the case, latched it, and returned it to the SUV guy who had been parked quietly at the end of the street the whole time. As he took it back, he handed me a small USB stick without saying a word. Then he vanished down the road, just like before. The sheriff approached me one more time before leaving. Hell of a setup you ran here. Sometimes you gotta bait the trap to catch the rats. You ever consider joining the county team? We could use someone with your brain and your discipline. I laughed. I've already served my time. He nodded and tipped his hat. Still serving far as I'm concerned. As the fake cops were driven off, one of them shouted something about filing a countersuit. The sheriff didn't even glance back. The doors slammed shut and they were gone. I stepped back into my garage and closed the door slowly behind me. The tools were still there. The drill still sat on the floor. The work I'd been doing before the circus started remained unfinished, but the real project, the one they never saw coming, that was complete. And I didn't even have to lift a single weapon. Just the truth. Just the plan. Just years of training channeled into a new battlefield. My home. My rules. The sun had barely risen the next morning when my phone buzzed. It wasn't a call or a text. It was an alert from the neighborhood group app, the same one the fake HOA enforcers had used to spread their so-called authority. I opened it, half expecting another post full of dramatic nonsense. What I found instead was a frantic, all-caps message from Karen, the one who had started this entire fantasy HOA movement in the first place. She was demanding that everyone refrain from jumping to conclusions, and insisted that the two men arrested were only trying to protect neighborhood standards. Attached to her message was a blurry photo of the sheriff's vehicle from the day before, followed by a paragraph of pure deflection. She blamed outsiders, anti-community forces, and even hinted that I might be a government plant trying to undermine neighborhood cohesion. I couldn't help but laugh. The desperation was starting to stink. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Within minutes, dozens of residents began commenting under her post. People who had stayed silent for months were now speaking up. They shared screenshots of fake citations, emails demanding donations, and one particularly damning voice message where Ponytail had threatened a woman with property sanctions for using Christmas lights in February. Then came the real blow. A neighbor posted a video, taken from my own surveillance footage, that showed both fake enforcers screaming about arrest warrants while standing on my driveway, citing codes from a non-existent HOA. The clip ended with me silently pointing at the faded line in the pavement and telling them exactly where their fantasy ended. The video caught fire. Within hours, it had made its way off the app and onto local Facebook groups. A meme was born. Someone added a caption that read, "Neighborhood law ends here," and photoshopped a fake badge with crayons and glitter. Even the sheriff shared it from the department's official account with the words, "Don't impersonate. Don't trespass. Don't mess around." The fallout came swiftly. Karen resigned from her self-appointed neighborhood council by noon. She posted another long-winded message about stepping down for personal reasons, but by then, no one cared. The illusion of authority she had helped create had crumbled, and there was no rebuilding it. The Segway Kid's parents showed up at my door with a homemade pie and an apology. I accepted the pie, told the kid to stick to real volunteering next time, and moved on. No need to humiliate a teenager trying to belong. The same couldn't be said for the two men currently sitting in the county jail. Charges were filed: impersonating law enforcement, attempted fraud, trespassing, harassment. The sheriff told me off the record that their little game had crossed into felony territory once they made physical contact and issued threats. Their lawyer tried to spin it as a performance art activism, but even the judge laughed. Community service was ordered while the investigation continued. Part of their sentence? Weekly cleanup duty, supervised, right in the neighborhood they tried to control. One afternoon, I watched them from my porch as they picked up trash along the road in bright orange vests. Their fake badges were long gone, replaced with community-issued work gloves and a bag of garbage. A few cars slowed to take pictures. One driver rolled down their window and asked for a quote from the Green Beret guy. I just lifted my drink and said, "Some people clean up the neighborhood. Some people are the mess." The driver honked, laughed, and kept moving. I didn't mind the attention, but I wasn't looking for it either. This wasn't about going viral. It was about balance. About making sure people who thrived on fear couldn't keep fooling the quiet ones. The garage, finally finished, stood exactly how I wanted it. New hinges, sealed insulation, security panels tucked away discreetly, and one more addition, a small plaque mounted inside just above the workbench. It read, "Operation HOA ends here." My niece brought it over as a surprise. She grinned when I saw it, and handed me a cake from the local bakery. The frosting was simple, white with green letters. It said, "Mission accomplished, Uncle." We shared it on the porch that evening with a few neighbors who had come to thank me in person. Some brought drinks. Others brought chairs. No one talked about HOA bylaws. No one handed out citations. They just laughed, told stories, and enjoyed the peace that had finally returned. I received a letter a few days later. Not an email. A real, official envelope hand-delivered by a county deputy. Inside was a document with my name on it, and a shiny new certification, licensed general contractor. Apparently, someone at the county office had pulled a few strings. The sheriff had submitted a quiet recommendation along with my documentation from the garage project. It was legal now. Official. Mine. No questions asked? No permit disputes. Just respect earned and given back. At the bottom of the page was a handwritten note. It said, "Figured you earned the right to keep building. The good kind?" I framed that too. And still, despite it all, I kept my distance from anything that smelled like leadership. When someone knocked on my door a week later to ask if I'd consider heading a new, real HOA board, one that would be transparent and community elected, I gave them a polite smile and shook my head. I didn't need a title. I didn't want a podium. I already had what I needed. A clear driveway. A finished garage. And a reputation that told everyone the same thing without me ever having to raise my voice. Don't knock with fake authority. Don't invent rules on my land. And don't ever mistake silence for weakness. Some of us didn't retire. We simply came home. And we don't bark back, we wait. We listen. And when the moment is right, we end the game. As the sun set that evening, I sat on my porch one last time, watching the street go quiet. The neighborhood felt different now. Not perfect. But peaceful. Kids laughed from a few doors down. A man walked his dog past my yard and nodded respectfully. No clipboards. No costumes. Just people. Living. Free. I leaned back, took a slow sip from my glass, and let the day fade into night with the simple satisfaction of knowing that the wolves in sheep's polos had been exposed, and this time, they wouldn't be coming back.